everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com back again for the last graded episode of 2020, where we take a look back at all of WWE's pay-per-views and assign each individual pay-per-view a lovely individual grade. That's right. Now, it's been a year that's been unquestionably the weirdest WWE year in terms of pay-per-views because, obviously, a lot of them, the majority of them, took place either in the deserted Performance Center or in the Thunderdome in Orlando, or more recently in Tampa with all the screens and all. But despite not having fans there for most of the year, WWE still packed a lot in. We still had a full pay-per-view schedule. Some were good, some were bad. But how do we know which ones were good and which ones were bad? There's only one way to find out, and that is by assigning each individual pay-per-view a lovely individual grade. That's right, it's time for WWE All Pay-Per-Views of 2020 Graded. Now, if you've seen one of these before, usually I just run straight through the NXT shows and give them a very quick grade right at the start. So I'm just going to do that now. There's not going to be much like insight or analysis here. I'm literally just going to list them, and then you can go and look at the card, look at the match quality, and see if you agree or disagree. So for NXT, I've got the first one here, UK Blackpool 2, UK TakeOver Blackpool 2. That gets an A-. Worlds Collide I've slipped in as well. It might count, it might not, but I've given that an A- too. That was a good show. TakeOver Portland, one of the best pay-per-views of the year. That gets an A+, no questions about it. In Your House, more disappointing, that gets a B. Still a decent show, but by NXT's usual high standards, that fell a little bit short for me. TakeOver 30, slightly better at a B+. TakeOver 31, right back up there with an A grade. And most recently, TakeOver War Games gets an A-. And you know what, why not? Now that we've had our first full year of AEW, I'll throw in some AEW grades too. So for their 4 pay-per-views of the year, I'm giving Revolution an A+. I thought that was probably my favourite pay-per-view of the entire year. Double or Nothing gets an A-. All Out, bit of a dip there again from AEW's, high standards, similar to NXT. That only gets a B grade. A lot of the atmosphere of the show was ruined by Matt Hardy's scary fall, remember that? But there were still some good matches on the card too. And Full Gear, most recently, gets an A grade. So now that all of that is out of the way, it's time to crack on with WWE's main roster pay-per-views. And we're starting things off with the Royal Rumble. This year's Royal Rumble was main evented by a superb men's Royal Rumble match, generally considered to be right up there amongst the greatest Rumbles ever in the match's history. So great way to start the year there. It was obviously highlighted by Brock Lesnar's insane run, starting off the match, eliminating a record 13 people en route to being shockingly eliminated by Drew McIntyre. A huge moment in the career of Drew and one of the biggest moments of 2020. Another one of 2020's biggest moments also happened in this match, of course, the stunning return of Edge. Women's Royal Rumble, it wasn't as good. It had a very prestigious and deserving winner in the form of Charlotte Flair. A lot of people were maybe looking for a member of the NXT women's roster to maybe win that Rumble match just to elevate their stock and the stock of their entire brand, especially coming off the back of an impressive performance for NXT at Survivor Series 2019. But that didn't happen. Charlotte Flair won the match. And generally the quality of this one wasn't quite up to scratch, not just compared to the excellent men's Rumble, but also the women's Rumbles of previous years. I feel like this was maybe a little bit of a weak link. We did have surprise returns, of course, from the likes of Molly Holly, Kelly, and Santina Marella. Now, in all fairness, a couple of newer stars on the WWE roster, Bianca Belair and Shayna Baszler, did pick up 8 eliminations each. They had strong showings, but it was Baszler last eliminated by Charlotte Flair en route to the Queen's victory. And now that we know what she did with that title shot, it does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity in hindsight. There was other stuff on this card as well, of course. A Falls Count Anywhere match between Roman Reigns and Baron Corbin. Asuka versus Becky Lynch, where Becky Lynch successfully defended her Raw Women's Championship. And a strap match between Daniel Bryan and The Fiend. Those 3 matches were all pretty fun. So I think on balance, apart from the men's Royal Rumble, which was just superb, I think this show was generally very fun, but could have been even better. There were some moments where it was just a little bit lacking, not least that women's Royal Rumble. So I'm going to give it an A- grade for now. And don't worry, because the high quality is going to continue, because we're jetting off to the beautiful city of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, for Super ShowDown, the latest installment in WWE's relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Always good for a laugh, isn't it? in terms of wrestling, not in terms of the socio-economic and political troubles and controversies that have come about. It doesn't matter, we've not got enough time to go into that. Thankfully, nobody got stuck on the runway this time, but this was still a pretty disappointing show, it has to be said. We have to mention, of course, the Chewaake Trophy Gauntlet match, the long, meandering Gauntlet match as well, which ended with AJ Styles thinking he'd won because the club had jumped Rey Mysterio backstage, but then The Undertaker took Rey's place and just squashed AJ Styles, absolutely squashed him, and then didn't even take the Chewaake Trophy with him that he just won on his way to the back. Disappointing. It wasn't the only squash match on the card though, as Brock Lesnar absolutely ended Ricochet's push. What on earth was the point of that? And in the main event, Goldberg defeated The Fiend to become Universal Champion in 2020. Now, in terms of the actual wrestling on the show, we've seen worse wrestling at various different Saudi Arabia shows, but the booking here was absolutely atrocious. So even though everybody put in a decent shift, all the wrestlers did about as well as they could have been expected to, it was written so badly that I'm going to have to give it a D- grade. Back to the States now for Elimination Chamber, and I guess we should start by talking about those Elimination Chamber matches. The main event was a very divisive women's Elimination Chamber match for the #1 contendership at WrestleMania, in which Shayna Baszler just absolutely dominated. She destroyed and eliminated every other competitor in the match. But that's really weird, isn't it? Because now that we know what happened at WrestleMania, it just seems like an absolute waste of time. And now that Shayna's just another member of the Raw roster, what on earth did it achieve? The other chamber match on the night was a crowded but entertaining affair for the SmackDown Tag Team Championships. We had various different highlights in this match, such as Otis crashing clean out of the Elimination Chamber, Lince Dorado doing an absolute madness from the roof of the cell down to the canvas below, and of course Miz and Morrison escaping somehow with their tag title reign still intact. Elsewhere on the card, Daniel Bryan and Drew Gulak opened the show with a very technical, classic wrestling exchange, which was probably on balance match of the night. Elsewhere, Sami Zayn beat Braun Strowman for the IC title in a very uninspiring 3-on-1 handicap match. And of course, The Undertaker was back to bully AJ Styles some more, costing him his match against Aleister Black and totally punking him out, despite the fact that, you know, he was going to face him at WrestleMania in the main event of night one. So, way to make your opponent look strong there, Mark. There was some good stuff here, definitely, but at the same time, again, it's the booking of this show that really lets it down. Specifically, the Shayna Baszler conundrum. What on earth happened on her road to WrestleMania to basically kill her push dead? I don't really know. I'm going to have to give this show a B-, because even though it was an enjoyable one in a sort of car crash kind of way, again, the booking has to be questioned. And now we get to WrestleMania 36, possibly the weirdest WWE pay-per-view of all time, for various different reasons. First of all, it was the first WWE pay-per-view to take place in front of nobody in the deserted performance center. Secondly, it was the first ever WrestleMania to take part over 2 separate nights. And finally, we also had the inclusion of cinematic matches too. So yeah, I think without question, this has to go down as the weirdest WrestleMania ever. So yes, on night one in the main event, we saw our first instance of a big cinematic match between The Undertaker and AJ Styles. WWE, they're kind of using the lack of a live audience to kind of chart a new territory, but inspired, of course, by Matt Hardy's Broken Universe from a couple of years prior. And to be fair, most people did seem to enjoy the main event of night one, Undertaker burying AJ Styles in the Boneyard match, which was very over the top and grizzled and macho, but a hell of a lot of fun at the same time. The biggest shock of night one, as I alluded to before, was indeed Becky Lynch retaining her title over Shayna Baszler, despite us just having seen Shayna destroy everybody in the chamber. So again, that just doesn't make sense. Elsewhere, we were supposed to have Roman Reigns versus Goldberg. That didn't happen, with Roman Reigns not appearing. Thankfully for everybody, Braun Strowman stepped in to take the Universal title from Goldberg and kind of restore a bit of normality. And he squashed him in a couple of minutes as well, because Goldberg does not do long matches. And a couple of other highlights from night one as well. We saw John Morrison, Kofi Kingston and Jimmy Uso take part in a strange triple threat ladder match for the Tag Team Championships, which didn't really make a whole load of sense, but was still very entertaining as well. And also Kevin Owens versus Seth Rollins, where Owens finally got his WrestleMania moment, unfortunately in front of nobody, but it was still really cool, diving off the WrestleMania sign en route to beating the Architect. He's not even the What is he now? The Messiah, the Monday Night Messiah. God, I'm living in like 2015. Night 2, I think it's fair to say, had less fireworks than night 1, but it still ended on a big happy note with Drew McIntyre finally completing his journey, beating Brock Lesnar to become WWE Champion, a very richly deserved win. Night 2, though, generally, I think, had more mixed results than night 1. Charlotte Flair, for example, beating Rhea Ripley for the NXT Women's Championship for a reason that nobody to this day seems to understand, and also Edge and Randy Orton going way too long in a very overly deliberately epic last man standing match, which was a shame because of course it was great to see Edge back at Mania. And of course, John Cena went on a trip down memory lane in that cinematic match with The Fiend. That was weird and very trippy, but at the same time, personally, I actually enjoyed it more than the Boneyard match, although I know that that is an opinion which I think differs from the norm. I think most people prefer the Boneyard match to Cena's Firefly Funhouse weird, mind-trippy experience. And it goes without saying, Otis got the girl as well, costing me the Cultaholic Heavyweight Championship in the process. Still not forgiving him. So I reckon B+ for night 1, C+ for night 2. That would average out to somewhere around like B- and a half, but I'm going to lean positive because it was WrestleMania. They really tried their best given the circumstances. I'm going to give it overall a lovely B grade. Next up, Money in the Bank, where obviously we have to talk about those simultaneous men's and women's Money in the Bank ladder matches which took place in Titan Towers. And there was so much going on in this match, or matches, way too much going on. We had cameos from Brother Love, Stephanie, and even Vince himself. We had so many attempts at humour, some of which landed and some of which definitely did not. And of course we had the cold-blooded murder of Rey Mysterio and Aleister Black by Baron Corbin when he threw them off the edge of Titan Towers. And this was especially weird because everybody just kind of acted like, oh, well, that's happened, let's carry on with the rest of the match. And then it was revealed later on they'd actually landed on a secondary sort of roof platform just below the lip of the first one and they were actually fine. Yeah, why not? Otis, of course, won the men's half of the match, winning the Money in the Bank briefcase and begging the question, how on earth is he going to cash this in? Now we know, of course, the answer was that he didn't, and he lost it to The Miz when Vince realised what on earth he'd done. In fact, neither briefcase winner cashed in this year, technically, as Asuka, of course, won the women's match, and then it was revealed that inside the briefcase was the Raw Women's Championship, which Becky had surrendered because she was going off to have a baby. Very nice stuff there. That moment, of course, took place after Money in the Bank, though. Even though it was genuinely heartwarming and nice, it did not take place on this show. In fact, it can kind of be hard to remember anything else that happened on this show apart from those two ladder matches. I'll jog your memory a bit. Drew and Seth had a very good title match for the WWE Championship. And on the other side of things, Braun Strowman and Bray Wyatt had a title match, which wasn't so good. The grade for this show very much rides on what you thought of those Money in the Bank ladder matches. Personally, I am like kind of dead in the middle when it comes to them. I didn't love them, but I didn't hate them by any stretch of the imagination either. But on the whole, the show was a very average one with the exception of Drew versus Seth. So I'm going to go slightly above the average grade and I think give it a C+. That sounds harsh on balance, but I'm sticking with it for now. And now we get to Backlash. This is the greatest show! Yes, of course, Backlash was main evented by the very weirdly billed greatest match ever, the rematch between Randy Orton and Edge. It was really good though. It did turn out to be a very good match. Now, admittedly, it was pre-recorded and possibly stitched together in parts, but what they produced was a phenomenal wrestling match to watch. I've got no real complaints about it. Even though the fact that it went longer than the WrestleMania match has to be taken into account, I don't think that harmed it at all. And I know that that original match was slated for being too long, but they went even longer the next time and proved that you can have a long match and keep it fresh and entertaining. Two absolute veterans and two absolute pros. There was also another good title defense for Drew McIntyre against Bobby Lashley this time, and their styles clashed together very nicely indeed. It also had storyline ramifications for Lashley, who ultimately blamed Lana for his loss after she came down to the ring defying the instructions of MVP. Elsewhere, we had whatever on earth happened between the Street Profits and the Viking Raiders. I know a lot of you liked it, and I have to just be honest here and say that I absolutely despised it. I didn't enjoy this feud at all. I thought it was wacky attempts at humour that didn't land at all. And it all culminated in this match, if you want to call it that, at Backlash, which took place before their actual match and was a wacky backstage brawl with lots of weird jokes and yeah. And then their actual match got called off because they all fell into a dumpster, didn't they? The problem is as well, I'm actually a big fan of both teams. I think they're fantastic tag teams. So if they just let them go out there and put on a match for 10 minutes, I'd have probably really enjoyed it. Everything else on the show, apart from the things I've already mentioned, felt a little bit flat. Like we had Braun Strowman easily winning a handicap match against Miz and Morrison. We had Asuka and Nia Jax going to a count out. And I think that ultimately this show was very much saved by its latter two matches, Drew versus Bobby and the greatest match of all time, Randy Orton versus Edge. So it gets a B grade. I think that's probably fair on balance. Next up, it's July, and you know what that means. It's time for Halloween. It's the horror show at Extreme Rules. Yeah, Vince obviously just decided to bust out all the horror gimmicks for this one. We had lots of weird stipulations here. Most infamously, of course, the eye for an eye match between Seth Rollins and Rey Mysterio, where Seth extracted Rey's eye to get the victory. And then he was sick afterwards, wasn't he? And we were too. Sick of wrestling. The main event had a weird stipulation as well, didn't it? It was Bray Wyatt versus Braun Strowman in that very weird swamp fight. Another one of these cinematic matches, but this one not as well received, I think it's fair to say. Even though it did contain a snake, a hallucination of Alexa Bliss, and Braun Strowman being apparently drowned in the swamp. Well then. And just to complete this trio of very weird match finishes, we obviously had Sasha Banks beating Asuka after the referee was knocked unconscious. Bayley put the referee's shirt on and counted the pinfall for her tag team partner. And even though it was declared a no contest, Sasha took the belt anyway, and then they had to have a rematch on Raw to sort it out. And I guess they sorted it out, but at the time, watching Extreme Rules, it just seemed like absolute nonsense. There were some highlights on the show. Another good title defense from Drew against Dolph Ziggler, where only Ziggler was allowed to use weapons. That was pretty unique and pretty good. Also the New Day versus Cesaro and Nakamura. That was pretty good as well to open the show. But generally, I think this was one of WWE's weaker efforts of the year. Unfortunately, I'm going to give it a D+ grade. Once again, the same old story. Not the performances in the ring, more the booking side of things at fault here. Now on to the third of the big four pay-per-views, SummerSlam, not in the Performance Center anymore, but in the Thunderdome with thousands of screens, all of us watching on digitally. But would it result in better shows? Let's find out. This pay-per-view was a very eventful one, actually. There was a lot going on here, such as Dominic making his very impressive debut in that match against Seth Rollins. We had Mandy Rose beating her former partner, Sonya Deville, in a loser leaves WWE match. And we had Asuka challenging both Bayley and Sasha Banks at different points in the night, losing to Bayley, but taking the title from Sasha, causing tension between the two best friends. And in the two big main event matches, Drew McIntyre beat Randy Orton in what was a very nice match, but should probably have been the end of their feud, and of course we now know it dragged on for far longer. And The Fiend beating Braun Strowman to get his hands back on the Universal Championship. That wasn't a great main event match, to be honest, but what was great was the post-match incident where Roman Reigns returned and stated his claim as the next Universal Champion. And really, from this moment on, for Roman, there was no looking back. B+ for SummerSlam, I reckon. Not as good as the Royal Rumble, but better than WrestleMania. So I've gone in the middle. Next up, Payback, which I don't remember anything about. Let me just do a bit of Googling, sorry. Right, so it turns out it was actually a pretty decent show, at least the second half of it. We had Roman Reigns winning the Universal title, that's certainly a big thing, beating The Fiend and Braun Strowman, and acting quite heelishly as well, turning up late to the match alongside Paul Heyman. Roman, what's going on there, friend? Of course, there was further friction between Sasha and Bayley losing the tag belts to Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax. We also had Dominic Mysterio teaming up with his dad to get revenge on Seth Rollins and Murphy. A very big, fun, babyface match. Oh, and I forgot about this actually. Keith Lee beating Randy Orton with surprising ease, signaling big things in future, which at the time of recording have really yet to come to fruition. Now that all sounds like pretty impressive stuff, but that all came from the latter half of the show. The first half of the show, I'm afraid to say, was kind of boring. We had 3 singles matches, all of which followed the exact same heel dominant formula before going to the finish. It was a show of 2 halves, this one. So this one's a bit of a disappointing one to grade, really. It's a bit of a wasted potential kind of show, is Payback. I'm going to give it a B grade. The booking actually here was pretty spot on. It was more the card's lack of momentum or structure in its match order that really cost it here. Next up, we move on to Clash of Champions, which started and ended with a bang. That's where its best two matches were located. First of all, we had Sami Zayn winning that triple threat ladder match for the IC Championship with the inventive use of handcuffs as well. And in the main event, of course, we had something between a no DQ match and a Shakespearean family drama, as Roman Reigns rather uncomfortably proved to Jey Uso why he is the head of the Anoa'i family. But unfortunately, a lot of the rest of this card felt like matches we'd already seen too many times. We had Apollo Crews versus Bobby Lashley, we had the Street Profits versus Andrade and Angel Garza, and we had another match between Asuka and Bayley, this time ending in a DQ. But shout out to Asuka though for pulling double duty this night. She was actually stepping in to replace Nikki Cross against Bayley and defended her own title against Zelina Vega earlier in the show. And of course we had that ambulance match between Orton and Drew, where McIntyre, despite being the big babyface champion, needed the help of Christian, Shawn Michaels, Big Show, and then Ric Flair driving the ambulance off at the end to get the job done. Weird. I think Clash of Champions on balance was of a similar quality to Payback, but with the positives and negatives reversed. So Payback had good booking and slightly below par matches. This one had good action, but slightly below par booking. So I'm going to give it the same grade. It gets a B. Decent stuff. Now we move on to Hell in a Cell, where we learned that 3 cell matches is too many cell matches, even if they're good. I think my favourite of the 3 was Sasha Banks' big victory over Bayley, finally taking the SmackDown Women's Championship from her, which was the kind of the high point, the culmination of one of WWE's best built feuds of 2020. The other cell matches saw, well, first of all, Roman Reigns and Jey Uso, of course, had another big epic family drama, this time in the cell, which continued to be very compelling, but I think maybe lacked the initial punch of the first one. It was still really good though. And then I think the worst cell match of the 3, unfortunately, was Drew versus Orton, which would have been a good match on its own in a vacuum, but in the context of the summer before it, I don't really understand what they were going for here. Why have Drew fall through the table from the side of the cell, get back bravely into the ring, and then just lose anyway to Orton? Why would you do that and end his title reign, especially when he'd already beaten Orton twice on pay-per-view in 2020 already? And I guess the biggest non-Hell in a Cell occurrence of Hell in a Cell was Tucker turning on his tag partner Otis to cost him that Money in the Bank briefcase. Nothing really came of that, and I genuinely don't know why. Now, if 1 or 2 of these cell matches had happened on the show, it would have been much, much better, but I think we did find out that 3 was too much. And unfortunately, the rest of the card kind of just felt like filler. We had a very short match between Elias and Jeff Hardy, which ended in a DQ, and we had Bobby Lashley versus Slapjack, so we witnessed the birth of Slapjack Mania. It's all good. Ultimately, I'm giving it a B grade. It's another example of a show like Payback, perhaps deserving a higher one if it had just tweaked a few things here or there. But it's a B grade once again. At least it was better than last year's Hell in a Cell. Now on to the final Big 4 event of the year, Survivor Series. And everybody was a bit down going into this one, I think it's fair to say. Mainly because we were all a bit sick of the brand supremacy thing. At least last year we had NXT thrown into the mix to shake things up a little bit. This year we were back to Raw versus SmackDown, the same old format. And it was happening so soon after a draft that we didn't really buy into this idea that the Raw superstars really wanted to win for Raw and the SmackDown stupid... Do you see what I mean? Raw won both of the traditional Survivor Series tag team matches, with AJ captaining the men's team to a 5-0 sweep of SmackDown, which was meant to be funny and kind of was, but also at the same time did a bit of damage to the stars on the SmackDown side of things. And in the women's match, Lana won because the last few people got counted out and she just stood on the apron and did nothing for the majority of the contest. So the booking here in both, Survivor Series matches left a bit to be desired, let's say that. And look, I'm not against the idea of having a fun or comedic ending to a match in WWE, but these traditional Survivor Series tag matches are such a good chance to elevate somebody from lower on the card up into the higher echelon, like we saw with Keith Lee last year, for example. And I think that was wasted here. In the build to the main event, champion versus champion match between Reigns and Drew, Roman called McIntyre a second-rate champion and then proved it by beating him at the event. This was a match of 2 halves for me. The first half felt a bit slow, a bit plodding, but they really ramped up the drama towards the end, and it ended up probably being the best thing on the night. But unfortunately, despite that, I am going to have to give this show a C+, the worst Big 4 grade of 2020. And they need to freshen things up in the new year, don't they? They need to find a new way of making Survivor Series fun again. They were onto something last year with NXT. They went back on it this year, and I think they paid the price. And finally, we reach the end of 2020 with the pay-per-view that we've just seen very recently in the memory, TLC, which I think actually ended the year on a real high point for WWE. Both the signature tables, ladders and chairs matches were really good. First, we had, of course, Drew McIntyre defending the title against AJ Styles and The Miz cashing in. It all got a bit chaotic, and Drew was able to emerge on one leg with his title reign still there. That was really good. Reigns versus Owens for the Universal Championship was really good too. A tale of how Kevin Owens just will not die, will not stay down, but Roman ultimately managed to beat him anyway. It made both men look strong. And of course, another divisive, shall we say, main event. I wasn't too big a fan of it. Some people actually really were. Adam Pacitti, one of them. Randy Orton setting The Fiend ablaze to end the show and to end 2020 in terms of pay-per-views for WWE. Who's the babyface here? And of course we had that big return at TLC, didn't we? Which I forgot to mention almost. So Lana was the center of this storyline, wasn't she? Where she was getting bullied by Nia and Shayna. So she made friends with Asuka to try and take their women's tag titles. Then she got beaten down on Raw and injured by Shayna. And then she got pulled out of her own storyline that she's the focal point of. And then Charlotte was revealed as Asuka's mystery partner, and they immediately won the tag belts. So I don't know what that means for Lana, but at the time of recording, I still don't know. So I guess I'm going to find out soon, hopefully. Despite that strange piece of booking there, though, I think TLC generally was an enjoyable show, and I think in a nice sort of cyclical fashion, it ends WWE's 2020 with an A- grade, just like the Royal Rumble kicked it off with the very same score. So that's it for every WWE pay-per-view of 2020 graded, with a few cheeky NXT and AEW shows thrown in the mix at the start as well. Thank you very much for watching this video. Of course, it's just my opinion. I'd love to hear what you think as well. Please do leave your thoughts in the comments section down below. Let me know where you agreed, where you disagreed, what your grades would have been for various different shows, and all the rest of it. And of course, I've been Jack from Cultaholic.com. Stay safe out there, stay positive, and have a great new year.